This was back in 2013. For context, I'm a female who had just dropped out of college, and I was struggling financially. I was employed at a local restaurant, but the pay was minimum wage, and nobody except the managers were allowed to work full time. So, in the bitter cold of January, I urgently needed to job hunt for some extra income. Most employers weren't hiring full time, and I wasn't quite ready to change my entire life by leaving one job for another that may or may not work out. So I figured looking for a part-time job with different shifts would be my best bet. My mom saw an ad in the newspaper for a new home and healthcare business in a familiar nearby area, so I submitted my resume to the email listed. I always preferred job hunting online, especially when there's a foot of snow outside. To my surprise and relief, I received a phone call for a job interview almost immediately. Like I said, I was a college dropout and struggling financially, meaning I couldn't even afford a car. I knew the area somewhat, so I easily figured out which bus route to take. I had never taken that route before, but the route maps were online and I knew it would be almost impossible to get lost, given that I knew the closest intersection based off the address. It was located in a strip mall, just off of one of the city's major roads, right across the street from where one of my best friends used to live. I hated taking the bus, but I had no alternative as I was broke, and most of my friends and family either had work at the time or were in the same boat as me regarding lack of transportation. I hated it because, as a female, most of the male passengers were just really creepy and made me feel very uncomfortable on a daily basis to the point where I refused to leave the house without my pepper spray, a pocket knife, and a hypervigilant attitude. There were also quite a few loud, obnoxious, unhygienic, and rude passengers, but the former is my primary reason for my aversion to bus rides. On the day of my interview, I brought my headphones and listened to my music as I always do. I don't like silence, and music lifts me up. Also, I like to think of headphones as my signal to other passengers that I am not interested in socializing. I'm extremely introverted and difficult to entertain, so my tunes usually blocked out unwanted voices of my fellow bus riders. That didn't always stop them. Like this one dude sitting next to me who kept waving in my face. He was dressed in a nice business suit and had what I can only describe as a mix between a satchel and a brown leather briefcase that matched his shoes. His satchel case would have completed, not ruined, his entire look if there hadn't been all those tiny scratches on it. It looked like multiple cats had kneaded on it. It was just weird. Sadly, I could hear him pathetically pleading for my attention over my headphones, due to a combination of him being very loud and I just happened to get a quiet file on shuffle. He asked if I was cold. I live in the Midwest. It's January. There's a foot of snow outside, and I just got on the bus from outside. Yes, I'm cold. What kind of a stupid question is that? Clearly, I'm cold. We all are. I was shivering for crying out loud. I replied in an irritated tone, "Yeah." He then noticed my headphones and asked me what I was listening to. "Music," I said, not even trying to mask my irritation and being intentionally rude. Now, before you start thinking I'm just a rude, antisocial bitch, if you're a young female on a public bus in my town, you can't be friendly without getting stalked, harassed, or sexually assaulted. I'm an introvert anyway, so the shorter my conversations with strangers, the better. That's pretty much the extent of our conversation on the bus. I noticed a stop coming up very close to the strip mall, so I was prepared to get off the bus. I could see the area where my interview was, so I was good to go. Luckily, someone else pulled the string to signal the driver to stop, so I nearly leapt out of my seat at the last possible second, hoping he wouldn't plan to get off there with me if he noticed ahead of time. The roads were plowed pretty well, but the parking lot of the strip mall was not. My pants were literally soaked up to my knees by the time I reached the first door. For visualization, The strip mall was essentially a parking lot with a row of maybe 5 businesses on each side facing each other. I was struggling to find the place because the address was listed as Suite C, and there was no such label on any door. Most of them weren't even labeled with anything more than the business name. I wasn't even sure which direction the addresses started from, so I couldn't just look for a letter and figure out from there where C was. I had already walked around twice, looking for the place to no avail when I noticed my bus had just looped around the mall and let off Satchel Guy, who was rapidly approaching me from the other side of the lot. I went into the suite on the very end of one side of the parking lot, which was a restaurant. The hostess seemed very friendly, and I asked her if she could point me to the business I was looking for. She didn't know either, since it was new, so I figured I'd just try every door. There weren't that many. I've decided not to name the company because, well, first of all, it's hard to pronounce due to what I think is a French origin. I still don't know the correct pronunciation. Maybe I've been nailing it since my first attempt, or maybe I've been butchering it. But more importantly, the name of the business was actually the owner's last name, so for privacy reasons, I'm leaving that detail out. There's another reason, but I'll explain later. No sooner did I exit the restaurant did I bump into Mr. Satchel, who was entering just as I left. I rushed past him so he couldn't bother me, and rushed into one of the businesses that was clearly labeled and occupied, a hair salon. They didn't know about this place either. This time I hadn't even left when bus guy came into the hair salon now. He saw me and immediately asked if I had a cigarette. I practically said no with an angry eye roll, and he left. I stayed. I explained the situation. This guy was following me, and I had a shady job interview that I couldn't even find. So my plan was to stay in the hair salon and call for help. I don't remember exactly what happened over the next few minutes, as this was nearly a decade ago, but what I think happened was I must have called my mom and asked her to pick me up, only to be told I should attempt to contact the interviewer first. I don't know why I hadn't done that already, probably because I was afraid of looking stupid and paranoid, but I did this. The interviewer told me, while we were still on the phone, to step outside so he could see me, and he did the same. He flagged me down with ease and led me into Suite C, which wasn't labeled or even visible really, no windows or anything. So we went inside, and this time, as I was entering, Satchel Dude was leaving. I got hired on the spot. Turns out it was a legit business whose lease only began a few days ago. That explained a lot. After the interview, I asked if the guy before me was hired. My interviewer, without hesitation, said no. He then began rambling about how strange he was. I explained what happened, and he let me stay in the office while I waited to catch a different bus home after watching the previous applicant board a bus. So there's the good news. Creepy guy left. I got hired, he didn't. Business was legit and not up to anything sinister with its applicants. The job was essentially a telemarketing position. I wasn't happy about that, but I told myself it's just to make some extra income. Basically, my boss explained his medical inventions to me. He said that my job was to collect demographic information from a random page in the phone book he tore off for me. The questionnaire I read to potential customers asked a few questions, and I don't remember them all because this was so long ago, but the questions I do remember are: what is your age? Do you have any known allergies? Do you own any pets? Do you have any medical issues? Seemingly normal questions until you get to the end, which asks more personal questions that really don't have anything to do with medical inventions. Question number 7 resulted in many hang-ups and verbal lashings, and I admit it is kind of weird to be calling people asking for their marital status as part of a healthcare demographic survey. I didn't blame them one bit for hanging up. In all honesty, I know I would have done the same thing. If they made it to the end of the survey, we'd thank them and offer to set up a time to try out one of our products for free. So we'd have a driver go to their home at an agreed upon day and time, and we'd show them how it works and what it does. This wasn't something I was able to do since I had no car, so I was stuck making the phone calls and getting yelled at for simply doing my job, which I realize now may have crossed some legal boundaries. Needless to say, the job didn't last very long. First, there's no guarantee of success in the telemarketing business. In fact, failure is much more likely given the number of people who simply hang up, or yell at us, or not even answer at all. Getting someone to complete a survey was nearly impossible. I did well on my first day, beginner's luck. On the second day, we had to unplug the phones because one of the people we called, named Christine, was repeatedly calling back. Christine kept calling us names, threatening us, using racial slurs, accusing us of harassing her and being psychos who were obsessed with her and that we wouldn't leave her alone. Mind you, we only called Christine once, and we didn't press to continue the conversation when she expressed a strong disinterest in doing so. But that's beside the point. I quit on the second day. I put my 2 weeks in, and the next day my boss told me, on good terms, and I can't stress that enough, that I wouldn't need to finish out my 2 weeks. Because I was working two jobs and had a very long bus ride between shifts, I think he understood that I'd burn out very quickly. It was a cordial separation. I moved on to management in my other job, so the struggle didn't last long, but things got really weird for me when I went to file my taxes the next year. I normally file as soon as I get my W-2s, no later than the end of February if I can help it. Come March, I still hadn't received anything from them. I called my former employer, but the phone number was no longer in service. I submitted an email to the same one listed in the newspaper ad, but it was no longer a valid recipient. So I went to the strip mall one day when I had some extra free time, and Sweet C was now some kind of boutique. The owner said they'd been in business since January the year before, so shortly after starting up and hiring me, they shut down. I wondered if maybe they had just relocated, but my searches kept coming up empty handed. I couldn't find anything on Google, a phone book, newspaper, job listing sites, or even social media. I didn't even know my coworkers' last names, so I certainly wouldn't have been able to find them on social media either. So my last resort was to contact the Internal Revenue Service. I didn't want to get arrested for tax evasion, and I figured the IRS would know my previous employer's tax identification number at the very least, so I could make an estimate of my earnings, if anything. I was wrong. The business and its owner had just suddenly disappeared off the face of the planet. After explaining to the IRS representative that I had probably worked there less than 20 hours total at this business, she informed me that I wouldn't even need to file since I was employed for less than 2 weeks. So I let it go, and I was never in any kind of legal trouble, but I still wonder what happened to my employer after I left, and why he shut down the new business so quickly and unexpectedly. To this day, after a decade has passed, there are no traces of him or his business. He's just gone.